Self-respect is the cornerstone of how a person navigates relationships, careers, and even the small daily interactions that make up life. When you carry yourself with a genuine sense of respect for who you are, you automatically set the tone for how others perceive and treat you. If that internal respect is absent, then you unconsciously invite others to disregard you, and the price you pay is subtle but devastating. It shows up in being ignored, overlooked, or taken advantage of. And the crucial thing to understand is that this dynamic is not always about malice from others. It is often a mirror reflecting what you are already communicating about yourself. When you tolerate being ignored, whether by a partner, a colleague, or a friend, you are quietly endorsing the idea that your voice, your presence, and your contributions do not matter much. You may not say it outright, but behavior speaks far louder than words. If you continue to show up for someone who consistently dismisses you, you reinforce their perception that they can treat you with indifference and still retain access to your time and energy. In that sense, you are teaching them exactly how to value you. Self-respect, then, is not merely a personal feeling of pride, it's a psychological boundary that shapes the very fabric of your relationships. Consider how human beings intuitively recognize value. We know, for example, that rare objects command attention. A piece of gold is respected because of its scarcity and difficulty to obtain. Now apply this principle to yourself. If you are always present, always accessible, and willing to accept dismissal, you communicate abundance in the wrong sense. You communicate that your attention and presence are cheap. Self-respect intervenes in that dynamic. It says, my presence has weight. My time is finite. My contribution is not something to be treated casually. Without this internal conviction, you risk becoming invisible in the very relationships where you crave recognition. Psychologically, this also relates to the idea of hierarchy. Every social interaction, no matter how subtle, carries with it an implicit negotiation of status. If you diminish yourself by accepting neglect, you are positioning yourself lower in that hierarchy. And while some might argue that humility or patience is a virtue, it must not be confused with self-erasure. Humility paired with strength is admirable. Humility paired with weakness becomes a justification for others to overlook you. Self-respect means maintaining your ground even when the temptation arises to surrender it for the sake of acceptance. This is particularly true in intimate relationships where emotional dependence often clouds judgment. When someone you care about begins to ignore you, your instinct might be to chase, to prove yourself, to fight for their attention. But in doing so, you inadvertently confirm their suspicion that they can neglect you without consequence. The paradox is that by withdrawing and affirming your worth, you not only maintain your dignity, but often spark a deeper recognition in the other person of what they stand to lose. Self-respect is not about punishing others. It is about refusing to participate in dynamics that diminish your humanity. The long-term consequences of failing to cultivate self-respect are severe. You become a person who is easily overlooked in the workplace, where assertiveness and confidence often determine opportunity. You become the friend who is only contacted when convenient, the partner who is tolerated but not cherished. And in time, the world reflects back the message you've been broadcasting all along, that you don't think you matter. On the other hand, individuals who develop unshakable self-respect are those who are not only noticed, but relied upon, admired, and even envied. They become anchors in uncertain environments because their presence commands recognition. To cultivate this quality requires discipline. It means learning to say no when others encroach on your boundaries. It means walking away from situations where you are dismissed rather than begging for inclusion. It means prioritizing your growth, your education, your health, your craft, so that your life is filled with meaning regardless of who validates you externally. And when you build that internal foundation, being ignored ceases to be a threat. It becomes instead a natural filter, separating those who see your value from those who do not. Self-respect is not arrogance. It does not demand constant recognition from others. Instead, it establishes a baseline truth: I am worth being treated with dignity, and I will not compromise that for approval. When you live according to that truth, you automatically change the dynamics around you. People who cannot rise to the level of respecting you will fall away. Those who remain will treat you with the seriousness you deserve. And most importantly, you will never again teach the world to ignore you, because you will have taught yourself first that your presence has meaning. Attention functions as one of the most powerful currencies we have as human beings. In fact, it may be the most fundamental one, because where we place our attention determines not only what we value, but also what grows in our lives. Every moment of focus is an investment, and the return on that investment shapes our relationships, our careers, and even our own sense of identity. To put it differently, Your attention is the most intimate resource you can give to someone, and when you give it without care or discernment, you devalue both the gift itself and yourself in the process. Think for a moment about how markets work. When something is given away for free, it often comes to be taken for granted. People assume that because it is endlessly available, it must not be worth much. Scarcity and intentionality, on the other hand, make things valuable. The same principle applies directly to your attention. If you pour it endlessly into a person who dismisses you, who treats your presence as though it carries no weight, then you are not only wasting that resource, but also reinforcing their perception that your attention is cheap. The tragic irony is that many people do this in the very relationships where they desire respect the most. They offer limitless focus and energy to someone who treats it as background noise, all while draining themselves of dignity and confidence. The psychological weight of attention is immense. When you direct your focus onto someone, you are saying, "You matter. You are significant enough for me to dedicate my limited time to you." Time, after all, is finite, and by choosing to give someone your attention, you are literally offering them a portion of your life. If that sacrifice is not acknowledged or reciprocated, you are effectively being robbed, though often with your own consent. It becomes a lopsided exchange, and all lopsided exchanges eventually create resentment and erosion of self-worth. It is crucial to realize that your attention is shaping power. Whatever you focus on tends to expand in importance, not only for you but also for the person receiving it. If you consistently reward someone's indifference with more of your presence, you are teaching them that neglect earns more, not less. You're reinforcing their behavior by giving it oxygen. On the other hand, if you strategically withdraw attention when it is not respected, you send a very different signal that your focus must be earned, and that indifference is not a viable strategy in dealing with you. In this way, your use of attention teaches people how to engage with you, whether consciously or unconsciously. This principle applies beyond personal relationships. Consider how leaders gain authority. They are careful with their attention. They don't waste it on frivolity, nor do they give it indiscriminately. When they speak, they expect others to listen, precisely because they themselves have cultivated the discipline of listening and focusing only on what matters. Their attention has been trained to flow toward things of substance, and in turn, others learn to treat that attention as valuable. If you want to cultivate respect in your life, you must begin by treating your own attention as though it were treasure. Guard it, direct it wisely, and never squander it on those who do not understand its worth. There is also a deeper psychological dimension here. What you give attention to outside of yourself reflects what you believe about your own inner worth. People who respect themselves do not chase after those who ignore them because they understand that their attention is too costly to be wasted. People who lack self-respect, however, tend to scatter their focus everywhere, desperate for validation, and in doing so, they betray the fact that they do not value their own resource. This creates a vicious cycle. The more you give without discernment, the less you are valued, and the less you are valued, the more you feel compelled to give. Breaking that cycle requires a conscious recognition that your attention is currency, and like any resource, it must be managed with wisdom. Imagine for a moment what happens when you withhold attention. Silence, distance, and absence have immense psychological power. Suddenly, the person who once dismissed you becomes aware of what they are missing. They may not have recognized your presence while it was abundant, but the lack of it begins to speak louder than any words you could have used. This is not manipulation. It is a natural law of human interaction. People often learn the value of something only in its absence. By controlling your attention, you allow that absence to teach what words cannot. Ultimately, to treat your attention as currency is to live with intention. It means being conscious of where your focus flows and refusing to waste it on those who are indifferent to it. It means recognizing that to be ignored is not just an insult, but also a signal to redirect your most precious resource elsewhere. And when you do, you not only elevate your own sense of worth, but also teach others quietly and firmly that your attention is not free. It has a cost, and those who wish to benefit from it must pay with respect, reciprocity, and genuine presence. Boundaries are not walls designed to keep people out. They are lines that define where you end and where the other begins. Without them, you risk dissolving into the expectations, demands, and whims of others, losing your sense of identity in the process. The act of withdrawing when ignored is not cruelty. It is a natural expression of boundaries. It is a psychological declaration that says, I exist, I matter, and I will not participate in a dynamic that diminishes me. When someone treats you as though your presence is irrelevant, you face a critical choice. Either allow that dismissal to shape your worth, or reinforce your identity by refusing to tolerate it. The latter is what genuine boundaries look like in practice. Human beings operate in social hierarchies, and these hierarchies are largely shaped by how we allow others to treat us. If you remain silent when ignored, if you stay present while being dismissed, you communicate to the other person that this treatment is acceptable. You may not think of it that way, but behavior functions as an unspoken language. Every time you remain available despite being disregarded, you endorse that pattern, and the other person internalizes the message that they can safely devalue you without consequence. Boundaries interrupt that cycle. They place a cost on disrespect by introducing absence, withdrawal, or silence as a natural response. It is important to understand that boundaries are not about punishing others. Punishment implies vengeance, whereas boundaries are about self-preservation. They are a way of maintaining the integrity of your own psychological space. When you walk away from someone who ignores you, you are not trying to wound them. You are simply refusing to wound yourself by staying. This distinction is crucial because many people mistake boundaries for hostility. In truth, boundaries are one of the highest forms of self-respect, and when properly enacted, they invite healthier, more balanced relationships. Consider the alternative. Without boundaries, you become malleable, shaped entirely by the behavior of others. If someone ignores you, you chase. If they dismiss you, you plead. If they abandon you, you cling. In every case, your identity bends to fit their treatment of you. Over time, this erodes your self-respect and leaves you vulnerable to cycles of neglect and mistreatment. Boundaries, by contrast, create stability. They say, this is the standard by which I allow myself to be treated, and I will not accept less. That stability fosters dignity, and dignity commands respect. The act of withdrawing when ignored teaches a profound psychological lesson to the other person that your attention and presence are conditional upon recognition and reciprocity. This is not manipulation. It is reality. Every valuable resource in life is conditional. Time, money, and energy are never infinite, and when misused, they are withdrawn. Your attention should function in the same way. By removing yourself when dismissed, you allow others to feel the consequences of their neglect, and in that space, they can choose either to recognize your worth or to lose it entirely. Boundaries also serve a deeper purpose. They help you clarify who you are. Each time you enforce one, you reaffirm your values and priorities. If you step back when ignored, you are telling yourself, I deserve engagement, reciprocity, and respect. And in living out that truth, you solidify it internally. Boundaries, therefore, are not only messages to others, they are reminders to yourself about the kind of life you refuse to compromise on. There is also a paradox worth mentioning. People often fear that setting boundaries will drive others away. They imagine that withdrawing when ignored will lead to abandonment. But what actually happens, more often than not, is that boundaries attract respect. Those who are unwilling to meet your standards will indeed fall away, but those who remain will treat you with more seriousness, precisely because you have demonstrated seriousness toward yourself. In that sense, boundaries filter relationships, removing the shallow and reinforcing the meaningful. Learning to establish boundaries requires courage. It demands that you risk discomfort in the short term for dignity in the long term. Withdrawing when ignored might feel painful. It may trigger fear of rejection or loneliness. But the deeper truth is that staying in a space where you are overlooked is a greater betrayal of yourself. Boundaries require you to choose the discomfort of absence over the degradation of neglect. And that choice is what keeps your identity intact. Ultimately, boundaries are the architecture of self-respect. They define the lines of your personal sovereignty. When you enforce them, especially in the face of being ignored, you are not being cruel, selfish, or dramatic. You are teaching both yourself and others that your presence has weight, your time has value, and your dignity is non-negotiable. Without boundaries, you dissolve into invisibility. With them, you stand firm as a person of worth, someone who will not accept less than mutual recognition. Scarcity is one of the most fundamental laws of value, and it applies not just to economics but also to human relationships. What is common, what is always available, and what demands no effort to obtain is rarely cherished. People take it for granted, not necessarily because they are cruel, but because human psychology is wired to notice the rare and disregard the abundant. When you make yourself endlessly available, when you pour out your attention without limit, you unintentionally send the signal that your presence is ordinary. Scarcity, however, shifts the equation. By limiting access to yourself, you create the conditions for recognition. Because absence magnifies value in a way presence cannot. Think of the dynamics of supply and demand. Gold is precious because it is not easily found. Diamonds are treasured not because they are the most useful substance, but because they are rare and difficult to access. The very same principle explains why people suddenly realize the importance of a person only after that person withdraws. As long as you are constantly present, constantly forgiving, and constantly available, others learn that they do not have to work to earn your attention. They begin to assume that it is theirs by default. But when you step back, when you reduce the flow of your energy toward them, the absence itself begins to teach. It stirs an awareness: I no longer have what I once overlooked. Scarcity creates contrast. In the noise of daily life, where countless demands compete for attention, what is scarce stands out. If you withdraw your attention, even partially, it interrupts the other person's rhythm. They notice the gap. They sense the difference between when you were accessible and when you no longer are. That contrast highlights what was once invisible. It is a paradox, the very thing they overlooked when it was abundant becomes the very thing they miss when it becomes scarce. By embracing scarcity, you allow reality to reveal what words and pleas cannot. This principle also explains why chasing after those who ignore you rarely works. The more you offer yourself in the face of neglect, the more abundant you become in their perception, and the more they devalue you. Your increased effort doesn't inspire respect, it undermines it. Scarcity requires discipline, the strength to step back even when you want to lean in, the courage to allow someone to feel your absence instead of filling every silence with pursuit. That discipline communicates something more powerful than any argument. It says your time and presence are not infinite resources, but treasures to be recognized. There is a psychological depth to this as well. Scarcity does not just teach others to value you, it teaches you to value yourself. By limiting how much of yourself you give to someone who ignores you, you affirm internally that your worth is not up for negotiation. You remind yourself that you are not a commodity to be consumed at will. This act of restraint strengthens your self-respect, and that internal transformation inevitably changes how others perceive you. People tend to mirror the standards you set for yourself. If you treat your attention as precious, they are more likely to do the same. Scarcity also fosters appreciation in ways abundance never can. Imagine a song you love. If you play it on repeat endlessly, the emotional weight begins to fade. But if you hear it only occasionally, it retains its impact. Relationships follow the same pattern. Overexposure dulls appreciation, while intentional distance revives it. When you strategically limit your availability, you preserve the significance of your presence. You prevent your relationships from slipping into routine neglect. The other person is reminded that your attention is not a given but a privilege. It is important, however, to distinguish between scarcity as a healthy boundary and scarcity as manipulation. Healthy scarcity is rooted in self-respect. It is the natural outcome of choosing not to overextend yourself where you are disregarded. Manipulation, on the other hand, seeks to control or coerce others. The difference lies in intention. If your withdrawal is about punishing someone, you will only breed resentment. But if your withdrawal is about maintaining your dignity, you create space for genuine recognition. Scarcity is not about forcing someone to value you. It is about creating the conditions where they can no longer deny your value. The most remarkable truth is that scarcity often reveals clarity. If someone cannot recognize your worth even in your absence, then their neglect is not situational. It is fundamental. And that realization frees you to redirect your energy toward people and pursuits that do recognize it. In this way, scarcity does more than protect your dignity. It filters your environment, showing you who truly values your presence and who never did. Ultimately, scarcity is a form of truth-telling. It reveals to others what your presence actually means, and it reveals to you whether they are capable of seeing it. By making your attention and presence scarce when ignored, you do not diminish your value. You illuminate it. You allow silence, distance, and absence to do the work that words cannot, teaching the undeniable lesson that what is rare is what is cherished, and what is abundant is what is taken for granted. Respect is not something you can beg for, demand, or manipulate out of another person. It is something that emerges when your presence, your behavior, and your standards compel others to recognize your worth. This is a hard lesson, particularly when you are being ignored or overlooked. The temptation in such moments is to push harder, to insist that you be acknowledged, to prove through words and effort that you are valuable. But respect does not operate that way. It is not granted out of pity or persuasion. It arises from the way you conduct yourself and the conditions you establish in your relationships. If you attempt to demand respect, you often achieve the opposite. You communicate desperation, and desperation undermines credibility. The more you insist that someone notice you, the more you reveal that you do not notice yourself. People are astute at sensing this contradiction. They can see when a person is trying to extract recognition instead of embodying it. And in those cases, they are less likely to give it. Respect is not coerced, it is attracted. It flows naturally toward those who respect themselves first. To teach someone the price of ignoring you, you must begin by recognizing that the responsibility does not lie in forcing them to change. It lies in changing how you respond. If they dismiss you and you continue to offer yourself freely, you communicate that their behavior carries no consequences. If instead you step back, focus on your own growth, and cultivate strength, you create a very different environment. In that environment, the absence of your attention becomes a statement. You are no longer available on demand, and that scarcity invites reconsideration. But more importantly, it protects your own dignity regardless of whether they ever acknowledge it. Respect is deeply tied to boundaries and consistency. If you enforce standards one day but abandon them the next, people learn that your boundaries are negotiable. They test you and discover that your words hold no weight. By contrast, when you act with consistency, when your withdrawal in the face of disrespect is predictable and firm, people begin to adjust. They may not like it, but they come to understand that your attention is conditional upon reciprocity. Over time, this consistency establishes a reputation. You are not a person who tolerates neglect. That reputation is the soil in which respect grows. It is also essential to understand that respect is earned through competence and contribution. In personal relationships, this means being someone who adds depth, support, and value when you are present. In professional settings, it means demonstrating skill, reliability, and discipline. If you do not bring anything meaningful to the table, then scarcity alone will not make you respected. Absence has power only when presence has weight. Therefore, part of teaching someone the price of ignoring you is continually investing in your own development. The stronger, wiser, and more capable you become, the more evident the loss becomes to those who disregard you. There is a paradox at play here. The more you try to chase respect, the more it eludes you. But the more you focus on cultivating self-respect, the more others naturally follow. This is because human beings intuitively respond to strength and clarity. When they see someone who holds themselves with dignity, who refuses to compromise their standards for approval, they are compelled to acknowledge it, whether they want or not. Even critics and adversaries often harbor a grudging respect for those who live by their own principles. By embodying discipline and confidence, you create an aura that demands recognition without ever asking for it. Respect also has an economic quality to it. It emerges from cost. If you are willing to sacrifice your integrity for attention, then the cost of neglecting you is low, and others will take advantage of it. If, however, ignoring you results in distance, silence, or even the eventual loss of access to you, the cost rises significantly. People are far less likely to disregard something that comes at a high price. By refusing to settle for scraps of attention, you teach the world that engaging with you requires effort, and effort is what anchors respect. At the deepest level, respect is not about controlling others, but about aligning yourself with truth. The truth is that your time is limited, your attention is precious, and your presence has value. When you live in accordance with that truth, you naturally separate those who see it from those who do not. And once you see that division clearly, you stop wasting energy demanding what cannot be given. Instead, you direct your focus toward people, goals, and environments where respect flows naturally, not as a concession, but as a recognition of who you are. In the end, respect is earned not by insisting upon it, but by living in a way that makes its absence impossible to ignore. When you refuse to tolerate neglect, when you uphold boundaries with consistency, when you cultivate competence and strength, you create conditions where others must either recognize your worth or lose access to it. That choice belongs to them, but the outcome belongs to you. By living with self-respect, you ensure that whether or not others value you, you will never again live in a way that denies your own worth.